Right, so I've just come here to meet Paul. I met him back at Fully Charged Live, and some of you who are in the G-WIZ group may recognise him for the G-WIZs that he has himself. Now, and those of you who may have seen him, there may have been some of you who have seen him on Scrap Heap Challenge a long time ago. 2005. So Paul is just going to give a quick introduction, mainly about his experience with electric cars, because he's been involved with it for quite a long time, haven't you?
Yeah, since the early 90s. My first electric car was bought through the Battery Vehicle Society. It was a Hillman Imp estate, Hillman Husky, with lots of very leaky surplus aircraft NiCad cells. That motor then got transferred into a Reliant Kitten, which still exists. It's up in Scotland these days. Awaiting a project. And then between 96 and 99 I went to America each year to prep an electric Porsche 914 race car, and the performance we got out of that car in 1999 caused a guy called Richard Hatfield, who was the driver and sponsor that year, to get more interested, and he eventually went on to found Lightning Motorcycles, who produced the world's fastest motorcycle, electric or otherwise.
Nice.
The LS218 has a 215-mile-an-hour Bonneville record.
So you've been involved in this field for quite a long time.
On and off, on and off. The Sirocco that I had on the road in about 2002 was probably the first 100-mile-an-hour capable road legal electric car in the UK.
And that's right outside, isn't it?
That's outside, awaiting restoration. I sold it a few years later, actually a little after doing Scrap Heap Challenge in 2005.
Which episode was it for people who might want to, or do you remember?
It was with the Beasts of Bodmin, and it was AC/DC Dairy Dash. I tried to persuade them not to go down the milk float route, but they insisted.
And I can't remember, did they win, or was it the other two?
Yeah, we fairly comprehensively won. We converted a Suzuki Vitara.
That's right, yes. I did watch the episode a while ago.
Yeah, and you know, it's reality TV. Things did not happen quite as you see them on film.
Yes.
But yeah, no, that was maybe not the best received episode amongst viewers, but the crew were really quite impressed by the performance. That is also, by the way, and I've checked this with Robert, that is probably the first electric vehicle conversion that Robert Llewellyn ever drove. He'd driven production EVs in America in the 90s. And he had a Prius at the time. But yeah, that was probably the first converted vehicle he ever drove. He drove it at the end of the shoot before it was loaded up on the truck. I just took him for a little, let him have a little drive.
And I say, going back to the G-WIZs, how many do you have then? And tell us a little bit about what you're doing with this one.
Well, I've got 3 in total. The silver one outside came from over near Watford.
That's an AC as well, isn't it?
That's an AC. It's a 2007 car, not in great condition, but by the time I got it on the road it cost me £500. It's lead acid, but there's still some life left.
And I've never seen a G-WIZ with bold tyres.
They came off this.
Okay.
Because I put the good tyres on this to get it through an MOT. And this was a typically abandoned AC car, because they have the DC to DC converter permanently powered up. Yes. If you leave them standing, they'll run the battery down to destruction.
No, that's right.
And that happened to this, and
as I say, you've got your own BMS fitted to some leaf modules. So this is another way you can get the G-WIZ wired up for the road with lithium batteries. And I mean, what's your configuration here, and what's your?
Well, there are 14 Gen 1 leaf modules, so these are the 60 amp hour modules.
Yes.
And each module's 2 cells. So it's 7 point something per cell. So we're compatible with the charger. If you disconnect the energy management system, it goes to the default profile, it will charge the batteries up to about 65%. So we're very safe.
Yes.
With the BMS I'm adding
I just remembered your humidity thing.
that will allow me to charge to, 80, 90, whatever you want to set as an upper limit. So I've basically, call it 48 volt system still, at 120 amp hours, which is half what you might say you've got with the lead acid.
Yeah, so you probably have a similar range.
But you should only be using 50% of lead acid capacity
anyway,
to get any decent life. So, and the suspension is barely compressed with that amount of weight in it.
Yeah, that's the only problem with lithium cells. So with my silver one, it has come down quite a lot because it was weighing about 165 kilos, and the ones that I've put in the yellow G-WIZ, they're actually around 150 kilos. So that is weighing it down enough, I think. But so the way you've done your charger, then, would you like to explain that?
Well, at the moment, it's literally just disconnected from the original energy management system. Yeah. And it runs a default profile. Yeah. So it goes to something like 54 volt. But the modification, and I may well have my own video coming out. Yeah. The charger is disconnected,
and that's
from
in
the battery.
Here. So that's this circuit here going to the contactor.
Yeah.
This contactor.
So rather than for the moment, let's call it the DC to DC converter.
Yes. That unit
now,
just over here. Yeah.
Is disconnected from the battery.
Yeah.
So it's not running the battery down.
Yep. So the dash shouldn't be turning on whatsoever. There you go.
So when you plug the charger in, it also powers up that 40 amp contactor that you can see in front of the main vehicle.
And is that a 240 volt thing, or is that?
That's a 240 volt coil. That's the kind of thing you'd find in an industrial control panel.
Okay.
It has 4 circuits on it, each capable of holding 40 amps.
Okay.
Maximum, which is why I've got them parallel.
And how have you got it connected to the dash so it turns on?
It's not connected to the dash at all.
So how do you get it to switch on the converter when you start up the car?
That happens through a diode.
Okay.
So this is the battery input to the contactor. So when you turn the vehicle on, the contactor closes and you get 48 volt on this side.
Yes.
Which then goes through a diode.
Yeah.
And I'm using a bridge rectifier, which then connects it to this side of this contactor, which is connected to the DC to DC converter.
I see. So it engages whenever you shut the contactor, basically.
Yeah. And because it's a 48 volt ignition circuit, the vehicle will still power up, even though it's got no 12 volt.
Yes, that's right. Well, that's pretty cool.
The downside at the moment is I have no 12 volt power when the vehicle's off, so central locking.
Yeah, but then it's a small car, you don't really need to worry about that too much. Unless you want the convenience.
No. And, in theory there is an immobiliser.
Yes.
Which the immobiliser function would not be working at the moment. But...
That's true. This is Paul's latest project. What have we got here?
This is a Cagiva Freccia, which is a 125 two-stroke.
Yes.
Never officially imported to the UK because they didn't have learner power limits in Italy, and this was too powerful for the UK.
Yes.
Rather than 12 horsepower, these had more like 22.
And it would do 100 and...
No, this is not the really...
That's not the other one, no.
That's the Gilera. But these were the bike that people may have heard of from Cagiva is the Mito. It was a very popular learner bike. The Mito replaced the Freccia, and they did do a 12 horsepower learner legal version.
Yeah. And what have you done with this one? What motor's in it and what battery
Oh,
is?
the motor in it is quite interesting. It's an Agni motor.
Okay.
And in fact, it's a prototype motor. When they were experimenting with different winding configurations or number of strips.
Okay.
This is a motor that came out of the TT race project. It's not a motor configuration they ended up using.
Yeah.
But that's why it came about.
Mm.
And I've known Cedric since about 1992, though this came through another friend of mine.
Yes.
And so you've seen the belt drive across to a jack shaft, which then has a chain drive, so that I don't have to run an enormous rear sprocket.
Yes, that's right. So I was looking at that actually. There's not a huge sprocket on there at all. Is that the original one or?
That's like, it is higher tooth count, but it's not actually any larger than one of the sprockets that was an option.
And what batteries do you have on it? Are those the hybrid modules?
These are from a 330e hybrid BMW.
And what kind of voltage and power?
There's something like 58 volt each nominal. There's 16 cells.
And these ones are in parallel?
Well, they will end up in two in series for roughly 120 volts.
Oh wow, so it'll be quite a fast motorcycle.
It's going to be geared for probably about 75, 80.
Okay, but the acceleration will be...
Yeah, I have a slightly different philosophy that I developed through my racing experience.
Yeah.
Of not using particularly high current through the motor, but gearing it down low enough to get the acceleration, and then put a lot more voltage on the motor to get the RPM. And although Cedric doesn't like to run the motors at RPM because they can burst, they usually burst because they're hot and the resin's gone soft.
Actually, that's what I was wondering about my G-WIZ actually, because I was monitoring the laptop settings when I was on the dual carriageway. I'd done about 10 miles up the dual carriageway doing 50 to 55, and the motor was staying around the same figures as it was before I adjusted it. But then coming down, I wonder if it was the RPM that actually did that bar in.
Well, I suspect you might have had a problem
beforehand.
Beginning.
Yeah.
And one of the issues is that the brush temperature goes up fastest. Commutator temperature goes up second fastest.
Yeah.
And I think what they're doing on those motors is they're actually measuring the resistance of the field coil.
Okay.
To get an approximation for temperature. They're doing some software calculations.
So what's showing on the computer isn't entirely accurate in the first place?
No, it may be reasonably accurate, but it's going to be the slowest temperature rise is going to be the field coil. It was always a big problem in electric vehicles. Racing.
So it may have peaked at a different temperature that wasn't registered.
Very hot in a very short period of time.
And under a natural, well-working commutator, that shouldn't have done anything.
Well, I mean, I think they're moulded commutators, so you may have just got to the temperature at which the plastic in the commutator started to get soft.
And I did speak to Alex at Going Green actually, and he did say that a lot of the damage that happens to the commutator in the first place is what you mentioned, hill holding. Yeah, so someone must have been doing that in the past.
That's why you've got the odd raised bar.
Yeah.
But as soon as you've got a raised bar,
the smallest amount of...
Then, particularly as you go to higher RPM, you start hopping the brushes.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking could have happened, because I definitely wasn't pushing it that far, monitoring it when I was driving. But then coming down the motor, coming back along the dual carriageway, I was only putting 60 amps through it at max. But I hit 60, and I was at 60 for about a minute or two, and that's when the noise started. So I have a feeling it was because you could hear the motor spinning pretty fast. So it could have been that. But anyway, some amazing projects that he's up to. And if you wanted to follow what he gets up personally on YouTube, what was your channel? Is it just Paul Compton?
Yeah, actually the easiest way to get to my channel is you just go to paulcompton.co.uk.
Okay. And
that redirects to the YouTube channel.
And Compton is in COMTON?
COMPTON.
That's it, yeah. So yeah, if you want to follow what Paul gets up to, feel free to find his channel as well. And say in a moment we're going to have a look at the motor and see what's actually see what the damage is. So there's a commutator.
Yeah.
There's just one distinct ridge on there.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to yeah, that's the worst one.
Yeah.
And it does sound slightly hollow, as if these are moulded plastic commutators.
Okay.
And they're a thermosetting plastic, but they will get soft at high temperature.
Yeah.
So that's a scrap commutator.
Is there any way it could be sorted just for kind of using on a garden machinery?
Well, that's kind of what I'm proposing to do. It's
yeah.
only lifted a little bit. It doesn't seem to be completely loose.
Yeah.
So by skimming the commutator, you know, you may be able to get it back into a usable form.
Yeah, because another future project would be to do an electric lawnmower for going around the field on, so...
yeah, I think at lower loads you'll probably get away with using this motor for a some time longer.
Yeah.
Actually, there's several raised bars here.
Yeah.
And there's bars almost 180 degree opposite that are just slightly off too.
Ah, so this must have already been starting to go.
So this is where the
someone's been holding
the vehicle on the throttle, which you should net on the AC.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
On the DC, you just end up with a load of
heat
building up and softening the commutator. It was a classic way of damaging them.
Yeah. So this is unfortunately something that someone's probably already done beforehand, because I definitely haven't been hill holding. I only took it out on the road shortly, so
yeah.
So yeah, unfortunately this is previous damage, but as I say, we should be able to get it fixed for garden machinery, and that's probably about it.
We've got a raised bar, and we're going to have to be extra careful.
Yeah.
There's quite a lot of wear on this commutator.
Yeah. That's what we... that must have been the sound when I put the brushes back in. You could really hear the clicking.
Normally I'll be taking a much heavier cut.
Yeah.
Because that's raised and potentially a little bit looser than it should be.
Just got to smooth it out first.
I've got to take that high bar down.
Yeah.
And the ones next to it. It's just caught in the middle.
Yeah.
And I'm using a tool. It's a ground and polished insert you normally use for aluminium that I've found works really well on the copper they use for commutators.
Yeah.
And after this you've got a tedious job.
Yeah.
Because you've got to go and deburr the edge of every single segment.
So what tool do you use for that? Just to...
Probably a junior hacksaw blade with the ends cut in. And then a triangular file.
And if I wanted to get something that would do a similar job, would I have to get something, like just for a motor of this size or smaller motors, would I need something of this size, or could I get away with something?
Well, it's about whether the armature will fit in.
Okay.
You'd probably get this into a Boxford, which is a very popular hobby.
Yes.
Lathe. 500 or 600 pounds But you can be lucky. A friend of mine bought one for $250. So there's the unworn area between the two sets of brushes.
Yes. So do you think this would be okay to go back in the G-WIZ if it kept the amps down, or was it just no good at all now?
You might get away with it, you know, standard performance, especially with lithium and the lighter weight.
Yes.
You know, and particularly if you're really keeping the speed down.
And the other thing as well, because it's a 60-volt battery system, I could put it down to 80 on the field map start, because it would still be the same kilowatts. Or should I just leave it at 100?
Depending on how the field's set up, the stronger the field, the more torque you get for a given amount of armature current. So if you boost the field up, you in theory get less current going through the brushes to give the same acceleration.
Because I put the field map up to 150.
Yeah, I haven't read the manuals about...
Basically the field map, when I put the field map up to 150, it would let me do up to 60 mile an hour on flats, no problem.
That may actually mean that it's weakening the field.
I see.
Which means you're getting less torque.
Yeah.
The problem is any motor is both a motor and a generator.
Okay.
So any time a motor is running, it's also generating.
Yeah.
And it's producing the voltage in opposition to the voltage you're applying. So torque is related to current.
Yeah.
And as the voltage output for the motor rises, as the motor runs faster, it's opposing more of the voltage you're applying. So at no load speed, the motor's producing nearly as much voltage as you're applying. By weakening the field, you actually weaken the voltage that the motor generates.
Yeah.
So it will now draw more current, produce more torque, and run to higher RPM. But the efficiency is a bit lower.
And so that produces more heat, or?
Well, also if you're going faster, you'll tend to be using more power.
So I'd be okay if I set it at say 120 where it was running before. I put it up to 120, but the top speed was about 45 to 50 on flats.
I mean, I would very much stick to standard.
Yeah, so back to 100.
Settings.
And it doesn't matter about the higher voltage in terms of putting more kilowatts.
Well, you don't necessarily feed more voltage to the motor.
I see.
Because the controller can keep it.
But it just means higher. Oh, actually, I would have thought it meant higher top speed, unless the controller only outputs.
Well, if you've got the speed limit on, it won't.
No, that's true. The speed limit keeps it at 45.
I mean, on my motorcycle, I'll probably never go more than about 75 volts to the motor with a 120 volt battery.
Yeah.
Because I'll just tell the motor controller to never effectively give full throttle.
Yeah. I mean,
it's cleaned up all the way around.
Oh, nice.
If I come out, you can come in and get a close up.
Okay. Oh wow. That looks like a brand new commutator. How do you turn the?
It's in neutral, so you can just turn it.
Look at that. It's like a brand new commutator.
Well, that is effectively what they would...
That's perfect. So what's the purpose of sanding the
I'm just removing the machining marks.
Okay.
And I tend to like to put a little bit of a diagonal pattern on them that just keep rotating around.
Okay.
I've got a pretty fine finish, so this is just like surface conditioning.
Okay. While Paul's gone to get something to eat, he's just left me doing this. So there's some fine grooves there's some fine bits left in here from doing the skimming. So all I'm doing is going in with a fine screwdriver and just dragging out all of the bits in the gap, and that'll just make sure it's clear so it doesn't short. But look at this, it's a nice fresh commutator. So it may hold, it may not. We won't know if we put it back in, but I'm just not going to push it anymore, and see how it runs. So yes, we've managed to get the motor somewhat functional, but as Paul was saying, we won't know till we actually get it in. There might be a weakness in there, but we'll get it back into the car, and hopefully that will give it a bit more life for a bit longer. So yeah, so thank you, Paul, for doing that for us today. And it's nice to finally see your collection in person. So the thing that I mentioned on a previous video is the thing that I was planning to do with the car. So this is the motor that Paul has, that we're going to see if we can try and possibly get fitted to the axle. So do you want to tell us a quick bit about it?
Yeah, this is a I think originally a Brucer manufactured motor. There was a company in America called Selectria, which later became Azure Dynamics, and they actually did a short production run of a vehicle called the Selectria Force, which was effectively a Geo Metro, which is the North American built version of a Suzuki Swift.
Oh, okay.
And they built some 400 of them. So they had this motor, a custom single stage reduction gearbox, 144 volt lead acid battery system with an option to go to NiCads, but more money. They were something like, it was 1994, and they were $25,000 upwards. And this is a car that I was told I needed to rescue. And I got it here, but when I started looking at it, it actually had quite a lot of rust. And had been at an American college in their automotive department, and had all sorts of modifications and data loggers installed. And the reason people thought it was worth rescuing was because it looked good, because clearly their automotive department had blown a coat of paint over it. But you could actually see it was a very badly done paint job. Yeah.
So this motor, exactly what kind of power does this motor have?
The nameplate rating is 12 kilowatt.
Okay.
I believe the peak is 20 plus.
So this will be quite a nippy G-whiz if we can get it in.
Yeah, or potentially you limit the power and the speed to what the G-whiz chassis is capable of doing safely.
I reckon as long as we have a top speed of 60, that will probably be plenty.
The Selectria barely did 60, but of course that's a
bigger
car.
Yeah, a bigger car, yeah.
And considerably heavier.
So this thing will easily hit 50 to 60 and stay at that.
Yeah, I mean the Swift was something like 800 kilos.
Yeah,
so conversion.
So the only thing we were wondering first of all is whether we can get it past the axle. But looking underneath the AC, the motor doesn't look awfully too different in size. And this is actually, we weighed it, and it's not too much heavier than the DC motor. So the framework can handle it. It just needs a little bit of modification on this ring here, where it connected to the original gearbox, I would imagine, or it has a belt. Is that a belt drive?
Yes, it had a tooth belt drive down to the input of the single stage reduction gearbox. Yeah,
so that's that. So there will hopefully be some future videos on this. We'll see what happens when in the future, but for now, yeah, just thank you, Paul, for doing all that for us today, and we'll see in future videos if we can get that yellow G-whiz going back again with the current motor.
Now I just have to keep clean all the carbon dust.
Oh yes, of course, yes. It makes one hell of a mess.